Welcome to Open Tables. With your hosts, Cynthia Sue Larson.
That it's okay for everybody to change. It's okay to let things go. And that's really powerful.
Christopher Anatra.
The universe is based on commerce. You know me as the quantum businessman.
Jerry Hicks.
I feel like I've woken up in a parallel dimension where everybody's exactly the same. They look the same memories generally speaking, but they're different.
And Shane Robinson.
Nobody has all the answers, so everybody's welcome to share their ideas, and it really expands our consciousness when we do that.
Open Tables. Unique perspectives for a new view of reality.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome. I am Jerry Hicks, also known as the Dark Wolf, and welcome to this very special episode of IMEC Open Tables Pandemic Mandela Effects Special Edition. Before we get started, ladies and gentlemen, let's go through the legalese real quick, and then we can pull in our team. Starting out with our original disclaimer, the content you are about to watch is meant for thought and consideration. Please be respectful of each other and opinions shared. This is a safe space to express thoughts, ideas, and information. Please note that no copyright infringement is intended with regard to inclusion of short excerpts of material that are included in accordance with fair use under Section 107 of the Copyright Act. And for the special edition, we've got one more special disclaimer here. We are not offering medical advice on medical matters. We are not medical professionals. We have no opinion on how you should handle your medical health. We have no opinion on whether or not you should take certain medical procedures or whether you should avoid certain medical procedures. That is completely on you. And with that said, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to introduce our team for this episode, starting with Cynthia Sue Larson. You may know her from realityshifters.com. Christopher Anatra, our vice president, Cynthia being our president, of course. You might know Chris as the quantum businessman. Our secretary, Mr. Shane Robinson from Unbiased and On the Fence. And I am Jerry Hicks, also known as the Dark Wolf from the Dark Wolf's Den Show. Radio and YouTube channels. Cynthia, you are from realityshifters.com, correct?
That's right. And that's the best way to find what I'm doing, to sign up for my newsletter, see what I'm doing with social media, the books and so forth, and everything I do.
Excellent. Well, definitely, guys, check out realityshifters.com, one of my favorite websites. That's for sure. Christopher Anatra, known as the Quantum Businessman. Go ahead and introduce yourself real quick, Mr. Chris.
Hi, my name is Christopher Anatra. You know me as the quantum businessman. Yeah, and thank you everyone for watching this special Patreon edition of Open Tables. You're going to find this fascinating. Welcome.
And appreciate that, Chris. I agree. Absolutely fascinating with what we've got to present today. And last but not least, our secretary, Mr. Shane Robinson, Unbiased and On the Fence. How you doing, Shane? Go ahead and introduce yourself for the audience.
Doing wonderful, yes. Unbiased and On the Fence YouTube channel. Best way to get a hold of me on all of my social media platforms is in one location on the web, uotf.net. uotf.net.
Everybody definitely go check out that website also. And I, of course, am Jerry Hicks, also known as the Dark Wolf, host of the Dark Wolf's Den radio show and the Dark Wolf's Den YouTube channel. You can find my work over there or the rippinrabbithole.com. But ladies and gentlemen, welcome once again to the very special edition of IMEC Open Tables. And we know that we always have a sponsor for these open tables. Normally, as you guys know, it's a mandanimal of some type, but we've got a Mandela Effect sponsor today, and it is definitely not a mandanimal. Well, I don't know. They kind of look like animals. What do you guys think?
Oh, nice looking ones.
It looked great, but you were muted.
I was going to say they're kind of like in the insect family.
Yeah, the insect one.
soon as we go to that slide, who they
Yeah.
are.
The Beatles, ladies and gentlemen.
The
That's
Beatles.
right.
Look at these masks.
So
That's
it is
crazy.
kind of man animal. What kind of mask is it? It's like something they would put on somebody in like a crazy ward, right?
They look kind of weird. It's not a mask I've seen before.
Definitely different. There's smog masks apparently, and these were for before playing at the Ardwick Theater on December 7th, 1965. I didn't know masks were that big back in '65.
Yeah, exactly. And it's funny, like this photo is something that I came across because I was thinking about something totally crazy, like when it comes to like wearing face masks and so forth. Like, what would be the most iconic, famous band or whatever to wear face masks to do as maybe a concept as like a test run to see how the public would, react to it. And I thought the Beatles. So I'm like, let me see if there's any pictures of the Beatles wearing face masks. And boom, this came up. And like as a kid, I used to have these books of the Beatles, like all these like backstage photos, all this really cool stuff. I never saw this picture. And to me, this is like, this would be an iconic, Beatles photograph.
I'm glad you used that word iconic because I was thinking the same thing. I've seen a lot of Beatles photograph and I've never seen this quote iconic one.
Now, to be fair, I do study some history, and there was a lot of coal burning smog in England, especially London. So the combination of the weather and the coal burning would sometimes contribute to horrific air conditions. So if anybody needed masks, I guess it would be there in London. So it makes sense. But having said that, I don't remember having seen this picture outside of the last year or so. And you think you would have seen something like this.
Especially in this day and age with everything going on, you would have thought this is one of the things they would have tried to plaster everywhere. Hey, the Beatles did it.
It's cool. George
They're
looks
using
super
it
cool.
They were using it to protect themselves too. And the two of them wear it down under their nose like you do, Jerry.
As best I can, you got to breathe. But George Harrison still insisted on smoking even with the mask. I like this guy.
Hey, Jerry, you're definitely like the George of the group here, for sure.
Absolutely. I'll take that. I'll take that all day long, right?
They're our sponsor, but I don't really think the Beatles are going to be paying us anything, but we're at least using their photograph and talking about them because it's fun.
All this time later, yeah.
Well, it's a good sponsor considering the situations that we have at hand in the current environment we live in now. And you go back to like the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic and whatnot.
Yeah.
But you don't hear about masks after that. I didn't even hear about masks with that until everything else popped off in the last couple of years. But you really don't hear after that until recently of any, especially celebrities pushing something like that. How about you guys?
Well, outside of Asia, that's a big exception, and we have seen that. I think Shane's mentioned that before, maybe Chris too. We've seen that there in Asia, China, South Korea, Japan. It seems like it's more accepted part of their culture that you get to flu season, they wear masks, and also they've been hit hard by various things in the past. So outside of Asia, yeah.
I give you that. Asia is the one place that in my lifetime I've known the mask to be a thing, but not on the American or British soils anyway.
Right.
Yeah, even when the ones that the pictures started appearing about the 1918 Spanish flu and everyone wearing masks and you couldn't get on the trolley car without a mask and the police were checking, make sure you had. I never saw any of that. I never saw any of those. And I saw a lot of pictures of the Spanish flu, but I don't remember everyone wearing masks. So that's totally a Mandela effect for myself.
That is something that I would call one of your timeline insertions, Chris.
Yeah, exactly.
Because it really did come out of nowhere. And all of a sudden, this information was suddenly available when it was needed to be, if you will.
Exactly. And I think as we go through the rest of this special edition, the special presentation, people are going to begin to, with everyone's pattern recognition, they're going to start to see these patterns appearing. And all of these things that people just don't remember or don't have any recall of are all going to make sense on another level about why they might be in our reality now.
Absolutely. And we've been doing some research on this for a little while, folks. When everything popped off, we decided, let's look back in history. Surely, we remember certain things, but there's a lot we don't remember. We mentioned Asia a minute ago. Go ahead and pull the slide back up. If you had 1957 to 1958, the Asian flu pandemic. I don't remember hearing about a pandemic in the 50s, in the 60s.
Yeah, it was actually also called the Eisenhower recession. And for this particular one, I went to my mom because my mom would have been like, I don't know, at least a teenager back then. And I'm like, do you remember everyone wearing masks in the late 50s with with this Asian flu pandemic? And she's like, what are you talking about? Like, and she, like, where she grew up was outside of New York City. So you would think that she would be aware of these different types of things. But this particular, the 1957 Asian flu pandemic, she had no idea about. And I don't ever remember hearing about it. I don't know about any of you guys.
And to the degree of death that here on this slide, you can see it killed up to 4 million worldwide. That's a huge number. I don't remember that.
And even 100,000 in the 1950s would have been
right
in the USA.
Dramatic.
Yeah, and just in the USA would have been it doesn't sound like a lot in our numbers today, but back then it would have been a greater percentage.
It would have been a huge history footnote, right?
Definitely. That was my point. We would have heard about it, I would have thought,
Yeah, it would be part of when you go to history class, you'd learn about it, for sure. People would be talking about it still. It'd be like, remember what happened to old Uncle so-and-so, or, you don't want to get the Asian flu. But I don't remember hearing
especially considered one of the deadliest pandemics in recorded history.
Right.
For us not to have heard about it.
Yeah, and what's interesting is it's the second one we've heard about. We're all familiar with H1N1. We come across this one, and it's H2N2. This is like...
That is a brilliant. Thank you.
It's named in chronological order of my awareness of them. You know what I mean? Like this should have been one, and the one we heard of should have been two, and we should have been talking about this one because of the numbers, right?
And I would have heard about this Eisenhower recession too. I even had an "I like Ike" button because I don't know, my dad had it or something. It was kind of a cute souvenir. But, and I was asking, tell me about Eisenhower, because it was before my time. But I never heard about this recession, Yeah,
and all the numbers and the facts on this slide are all from Wikipedia. And even this like picture of these lady secretaries in an office wearing face masks on those old, old-fashioned typewriters. Like, again, it's iconic. But were they wearing masks like this in the United States in the late 50s? For me, it's totally new.
It's interesting how these pictures and these informations are just coming out now. And I like how Shane pointed out the H2N2 because H1N1 was already taken. One would think it was the first one that would have named it 1, not 2. So this kind of goes along the lines, once again, of a timeline insertion to me. Like they had to insert it, but they couldn't call it 1 because, well, we've already had 1.
Unless the naming convention is just screwball. It's all over the place. I mean, who knows? I don't know what happened.
Yeah. Still strange though. Yeah.
Really strange.
Yeah. So people that are watching this, like if you remember this, if you don't remember this, like leave a comment in the description area, because we want to know is it just us or is it a Mandela effect for you guys as well that are watching this?
Right, because these are definitely Mandela effects for me. Stuff that I definitely have not heard of in history. Don't remember being a thing in history. Don't remember being the deadliest thing in history to boot. But it was only the first one of our slides. So 10 years later, it happens again with the Hong Kong flu. 1968 pandemic, which almost killed President Johnson and his wife. Also, Woodstock occurred during this time.
Yeah, the whole. Go ahead, Cynthia.
Well, I think that's really attention getting, because Woodstock was a huge event with a gathering of lots of people. So I would have expected news stories to tie these two events together. Like we know now, if there's a large gathering of people and there's a pandemic or something going around.
Saying Woodstock, the original super spreader event, right?
Right. There should have been some commentary about it,
Right.
right? Yeah. But I don't remember any commentary about cautions like don't go to this thing, or we can all blame Woodstock. No, I don't remember any. I haven't even seen any conversation about that or commentary or
point.
articles.
There would have
Yeah.
been though, for sure, and we know that. Yeah.
Yep.
What else? Go ahead, sir.
I was gonna say, I want to throw in a Woodstock Mandela effect, because do you guys remember Woodstock being like hot and dry or rainy and freezing?
I'll take out freezing, but I was always taught it was rainy and muddy.
Rainy and
Yeah,
muddy.
muddy, and it was raining so much it just turned into a mud fest. Yeah, and it was dangerous for musicians on the stage at some points. I remember that.
But they didn't look cold. I mean, because they were in,
See,
it
that's
looked hot.
That's the thing. There's a lot of evidence that Woodstock, like I remember it being like hot, like people were scantily clothed and all that. And now there's all kinds of pictures. It was a rainstorm. It was like a big mud thing. People are wearing raincoats and everything. And I don't remember any. It's almost like two different timelines of haven't figured out how to merge together perfectly.
Well,
So,
what's odd is I remember aspects of both, people in the scantily clad clothes and whatnot in the rainstorm. Something else I'd like to point out about this particular first paragraph here. I've seen a lot of videos of presidents who have almost died, presidents who have had attempts on their life, things like that. Not a single time have I ever heard that Johnson almost passed away from the Hong Kong flu.
yeah, Johnson and Lady Bird got very, very sick. And it's interesting too, like we're going to talk about it on the next slide, but there's an astronaut that there were astronauts that visited Johnson and Lady Bird before they went on. It was actually orbiting the moon, and it is said that they actually got the flu from President Johnson when they met him. So, but we'll talk about that more on the next slide. But I thought that was interesting.
This slide with the antigenetic shift is really interesting because it's showing that there's some relationship with this Hong Kong flu that nearly killed President Johnson and the previous Asian flu, that H2N2.
That had the Eisenhower recession behind it.
Right.
Go ahead.
Well, I think it's fascinating to say that it was like 10 or 11 years later and now it's mutated, which I guess that could happen, but it seems strange. The whole thing seems a little bit odd. I don't know if that caught anybody else's attention. Like that, what's going on with that?
Okay, so it looks like they're saying that it was a decade apart between the different strains. So like sort of like we have nowadays, but it only took just a few months. Or they're saying like, the Delta was going around or whatever.
Right. See, I was always taught when it comes to viruses like that, for them to mutate, it doesn't just happen that quickly. It's a drawn out period. So over a 10-year period, that to me would make sense, opposed to over a 2 to 3 month period, as we've seen the supposed actions recently. It just seems a little strange to me. But what is even stranger to me about this slide is I didn't notice it earlier. Killed up to 4 million people worldwide, and 100,000 in the USA. We've heard these numbers a moment ago.
Yeah.
The exact same numbers.
Yeah.
That is super, super weird. It's almost like, again, that phrase timeline insertion. Like, why these numbers? Why is it again 4 million? Why is it 100,000?
Especially if it was a mutation, that should have caused a differential in numbers, not the exact same numbers, at least in my opinion.
That's pretty wild.
Like that just clicked.
Definitely indicates something suspicious. But for me, the whole big thing was that the 57 one and the 68 one, I never heard of either of these. Like, just never heard. These are both pandemics that I've never heard of.
And they were considered pandemics. These weren't just a version of the common cold going around, right? These were clear pandemics of the time.
It was classified as a pandemic.
Perhaps they actually knew what that word meant back then. But that's interesting, though. Once again, we're told today that this is the worst pandemic ever. We've never seen anything like it in our lives. Though I would disagree now with the evidence that we found. You would think you would have heard about this stuff, especially at the beginning, back in 20, back when all this research was really being done into what's going on and what has went on. And I don't know. It's like you keep saying, Chris, the timeline assertions seem to really be playing up here.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're just at the beginning. We're at the beginning. So we're just giving a little bit of historical things about how there could be Mandela effects, or what we call Mandela effects, related to these viruses that it seems like we've been fighting for more than 100 years. If you go back to the Spanish flu, at least with that one. So,
well, the speeding up of things, like, how quick it's come up with, how quickly they've come up with the shot this time compared to in previous times, and then how quick the variant has come up. Is that a Mandela effect, perhaps? How quickly these things are happening now? And, because we've said that for a while, things seem to be speeding up now.
Yeah, when you talk about speeding up too, what I thought of is this has to relate it to computers and software. Do you guys remember when Obamacare came out, all the problems with like the website?
Yes.
People couldn't sign up, and it was like
Yes.
$800 million.
Yes.
That kept on going. It took them a while to get that straightened out, right? And that was just like getting healthcare. But now you've got this whole like passport system that they've been rolling out in all these different countries to show your status. I'm in software, I'm in computer development. That had to be developed for a while. Like and people aren't getting it. They're being like, oh, somebody just created an app. No, it's like really complicated what they're doing. That had to be planned for a while.
Right.
So that just you made me trigger that thought when you said that.
Yeah, it makes me wonder if the insurance thing wasn't the front face for what was actually going on behind the scenes. But we could get into speculation and conspiracy another time. Otherwise, we wouldn't get the rest of this show out of the way. So going on to the next slide. So you spoke a moment ago about the astronauts that had been around the president and has supposedly contracted this Hong Kong flu from the president, right?
Yeah, exactly. Because they were saying that the only people they were exposed to before the flight was actually President Johnson. So they felt they actually caught it from him, and it makes sense because it was like 4 or 5 days since they met him until Commander Frank Borman started exhibiting these having the flu symptoms, while they're in their space capsule.
What a bad place. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I felt really bad for my daughter. We took this wonderful vacation to the beach once, and then she got sick, and she was just sick, and I felt so bad that it had to happen on the vacation. But like, oh man, in space,
that's the worst.
Fair warning, ladies and gentlemen, if you have a weak stomach, this might not be the part of the episode for you.
Oh man.
Because what we're about to go over, not only had I not heard of it, this is one of the strangest space moments I think I've ever heard of myself. As you said, astronaut Frank Bowman, sick while orbiting the moon, said to have caught it from Johnson. Ladies and gentlemen, this guy vomited twice and had a bout of diarrhea, for lack of better terms, in space, in the spacesuit. Okay.
I mean, I know, right? This, like, at least as a kid, we would have been like, "Oh man, this is so cool! Somebody, an astronaut, like had an accident in outer space." But I never heard of this before.
And it's interesting because they plan for everything in advance, but I don't know. I'd love to know: did they plan for this in advance? How would you plan for this in advance? What's the fallback? I don't know. I never heard about any of this ever.
I would really hate to be the guy who had to clean that capsule afterwards. This left the spacecraft full of small globules. Lord forgive us for this one, of vomit and feces, which the crew cleaned up as best they could. So we know what happens to water in space. It becomes little balls of water. What happens to vomit in space? Chris, you actually have read something on this, correct?
Yeah, well, one of the other astronauts, Bill Anders, described how, the floating vomit, whatever exact, in zero gravity, and how that
globules.
Yeah, I was actually trying, because I saw a transcript of that, so I was trying to actually find the interview where he said that, and I couldn't actually find the interview. It would have been cool to play that, but it very
But it
interesting.
proved Newtonian physics because the guy vomited for being sick.
Yeah, and somehow they were like floating around, like the little globules were floating.
Globules.
Well, it's zero gravity, so they're not landing, they're not falling down. They're just drifting until they run into something where they might stick to it. So it's not very pleasant.
Not at all. And you're not talking just vomit here. It was vomiting from two sides. I'm going to leave it at that.
Yeah, people are wondering why we're doing Patreon. It's because we're talking about this subject.
Right. Yeah. YouTube would not let half this stuff go on their platform. We ain't even gotten started, like Chris said. But Chris, Cynthia, Shane, and now all our audience at home listening to this, do you remember the Hong Kong flu in space while orbiting the moon? That's an ME for me. How about you guys?
This is totally new for me. And catching this from the President Johnson, the whole thing is very historical, and I don't remember hearing about it.
Yeah, same for me. This is totally new, and I know as a kid I would have been into this. It would have been so cool. So,
Well, do you guys remember when we were kids watching PBS growing up? They were selling like these learning type book series, and they said something like about George Washington with false teeth made of wood, and they had like these little things. And I heard that one wasn't even true. I don't know, like that might be a Mandela effect, but this seems like something you would have heard in one of those where they're selling these, these magazines, because it's kind of a weird fact. It's kind of it just would have come up in like one of the games or something, right?
Exactly. Pop culture, something.
Yeah, because I heard about the chimp in space. They sending a monkey up in space, all that stuff, and the dog too.
So it's hard to pin these down because so many times it's possible that maybe we didn't hear about it, and then because it's not like it's something we heard about that's changed. It's just possible that we didn't hear about it. Like the Rainbow Mountains, I looked into it, and then more locations popped up later, so that I knew that it was a Mandela effect. But with this, it's like I'm pretty sure we would have heard about it.
Right.
Well, let me take the devil's advocate on that. Mm-hmm. Cynthia, you're a physicist, correct?
Right.
And you spent many years studying different types of physics, correct?
Yes.
So when they verified Newtonian physics by this in space, that would have been something you guys would have been told, correct?
Well, I mean, Shane's point is still valid. Maybe they edited it like this is too gross to bring up on TV.
But I mean, yourself going through the teachings, though, you would have heard about this.
Well, I was fascinated by the space program. I built a lunar lander when I was when that was happening, when I was a little girl. So out of balsa wood. So these things fascinated me, and I definitely was following it. I'd subscribe to the magazines and get the books about it. So I would have heard about it, I'm pretty sure. Never did hear about this. And
I agree. Your statement stands, Shane. None of us have heard about it, especially something like Newtonian physics. Like something that you and I especially are into, the physics side of stuff. If it was verified, confirmed in space, like that would have been a huge, hey guys, one of the strangest verification of physics ever in this instance,
I'll add some, like another way to look at this too. Like the way I see it is, if this is a timeline insertion, one of those types of events, sometimes the concept is that it has to be like stitched in, so to speak. And sometimes that's not always perfect. So things like this will happen. And it reminds me, for those of you that have watched some of my Quantum Businessman videos, I did one about the hit Disney Broadway show called Aida, right?
Right.
When I first came across Aida as a Broadway show by Disney, I could hardly find any information about it. I found a little thing here, a little thing there. And then as I started doing more research, and as time went on, all these other like YouTube stuff started popping up that I swear I could not find before, where people that had gone to see Aida, they used their own home recorders and they recorded it and they put that up on YouTube, back in 2002, whenever it was. So like I started coming across all of those types of things. So my point is that sometimes these timeline insertions could be rushed. They're not perfect. There's other causes and effects for when you do something like this, when you're manipulating the natural order, I call it.
And for the Newtonian proof of this so-called unexpected, inadvertent experiment in space, looking at is force equals mass times acceleration, I imagine. So some of the particulates, the globules that are bigger or more massive, might be having a different trajectory and going farther faster than the smaller ones. And that would be an interesting video for sure. But maybe they didn't film it. I don't know. It would be kind of gross, the whole thing.
Agreed. Again, I would hate to be the guy that had to clean that capsule all said and done. And humans aren't the only ones who've experienced the 68, 69 Hong Kong flu. Some animals did too, correct?
Apparently so. As our next slide will show us.
There we go. January 1969, Shamu and two other killer whales, Ramu and Kilroy, appeared to be out of sorts. They had a bad case of the sniffles. I don't know what.
How do they get the sniffles?
What would that even sound like? A whale with the sniffles underwater? That'd be an interesting, weird thing. Like, how do you even know that, right? That's strange to me. Poor appetite, weakness, all over aching feeling. Because, Shamu was telling us about it, I guess. I don't know how they knew he was aching all over. That's new to me, too. Shamu, the paper reported, had been moaning all day and was lethargic and irritable. And it was diagnosed with the Hong Kong flu. Now, again, I've never heard of Shamu getting sick, let alone with the Hong Kong flu.
Yeah,
This is all new for me.
Very new for me too. Shamu and other killer whales are a mammal, so the thought is mammals can transmit from mammals to mammal. But to me, I think I would have heard about the killer whale getting the flu, but that's
new. And not only Shamu, but Ramu and Kilroy also. So there are three of them.
Right.
Anybody here heard of this before? Cynthia, go ahead.
No, and we've been hearing about zoo animals getting the current pandemic, catching something, cats, especially tigers, lions, that kind of thing. But even now, I'm not hearing anything about, and I don't remember this from the past either, about killer whales or any of these mammals of the ocean. So this is very new for me.
Scientifically speaking, it crosses borders that a lot of viruses don't cross. For those who don't know, fun fact, most sicknesses stay within that animal kingdom. So you don't generally get parvo where a dog does. You don't generally get a cat flu where a cat will. It takes a lot for a virus to really mutate a lot to jump from one species to another. Though we've heard the bat theory recently. Again, this isn't something that's that common. So for this particular flu, the Hong Kong flu, to jump from human to animal, that's even less likely than it jumping from animal to human. So again, a really weird oddity on top of this being a stitched in, if you will, Mandela effect. I really do believe that. Anybody like to add anything to this?
Well, I'm just wondering, do we know whether they got it before or after? Did they get it after it was?
So this is 1969. We know the original outbreak was in 68. So this is a year after the outbreak occurred.
Okay.
Yeah, specifically the astronauts went up, it was around Christmas of 68. So all of these events between President Johnson and Shamu was within 60 days.
So they're saying that it jumped from humans to the whales then at some point.
From Lady Bird Johnson to the whale.
Oh, and Ladybird. Now there's two different species that's crossed over. That didn't even dawn on me when you
yeah, right.
Go, yes, sir. So again, this is very abnormal in the animal kingdom. Not only one species, but two different species aside from human picking up this same Hong Kong flu. Just something you don't see generally in science. Would you agree, Cynthia?
Well, we are getting some animals that have the current pandemic, like wild deer, apparently, in several states in the United States. So it can happen, but it that doesn't tend to happen all that often that I've heard of. So this is unusual. Yes.
And this one being strange, the one we're currently dealing with, because of, we're told it originally came from a bat. And then we're seeing that it's jumping to other animals aside from humans, that we can argue the validity of the bat theory still. If it is true, you've got 3 different species, once again, who have caught this same pandemic, just like in 69.
In the past, they've usually been able to trace, or they're able scientifically to find the first and original outbreak point of a pandemic. But as far as I know, it's almost 2 years later. As far as I know, we still have not officially found the original source, which is interesting as well. Just there are more questions than answers there.
Right. And as we look into the past and these different pandemics of the past that, again, most of us don't remember. I'd say all of us don't remember the ones we're presenting. It's just very strange to see this again happening.
Yes.
You guys want to do some time travel?
Yes.
Yeah.
Let's do some time travel, ladies and gentlemen. There's that sound, that TARDIS. I love it. We're going to time jump from 1968. We're going to jump all the way up to 2009, a time in all of our lifetimes, right? I remember 09. You guys remember 09?
Definitely.
I was alive then. I'm sure you guys out here in the audience also remember it.
Seems pretty recent.
Right. Dr. Anthony Fauci, let's try that again. Dr. Anthony Fauci, a name that is well known in today's society, is the current director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, chief medical advisor to the president. I have not heard of him before 2020. Matter of fact, this guy came on the scene for me in 2020. I thought he was the new guy that they had hired for all of this.
Yeah.
Right.
But this is in 2009 that he was in charge of this. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct. Like, he was already on his way to a kind of, I don't want to call it celebrity status, but very popular in the news very often, on C-SPAN, almost all. I actually found like many videos of him on C-SPAN, but not a lot of people watch C-SPAN. But in the 2009, 2010, he was on it a lot, as well as being on the regular nightly news as well. And I, like you, I never heard of him before 2020.
Well, you said he was on C-SPAN. I'm one of those weirdos that did used to watch C-SPAN as well as news at that time. So to me, this is also definitely brand new. Go ahead, Shane.
I was just going to say that, with the absence of the pandemic for me, there really was no need for me to see this guy. So I don't know. I can say he kind of goes hand in hand with it, right? It's like I had no reason to see this guy in my past,
Yes. So as an example too, like we have some videos queued up, but we could just watch like 1 or 2 of them. So if our producer Heather could play one of them, either one doesn't matter.
How can a person tell if they have the regular seasonal flu or if they've contracted the 2009 H1N1 influenza virus?
Well, for a person, him or herself, to be able to determine that would essentially be impossible, because you can get everything from very, very mild illness to severe illness with either seasonal flu or the H1N1 new 2009 pandemic flu. Most of the time it's a mild disease, but there are unusual cases that can be severe. The only way a person can tell is if they get their blood drawn.
Okay, so I just wanted to point out that, and this was like probably one of the main reasons for putting this entire presentation together too, was this 2009 swine flu outbreak. And Fauci here is calling it, this is back from 2009, he's calling it a pandemic. So again, I know where I was in 2009. One of my sons was born in September of that year. So I'm like hyper aware of that year. And what we're going to learn about, some of the things we're going to learn about next, I have absolutely zero memory of. And I'm not sure, this video goes on for a while, but do we have that other one we could play too?
Again, I don't remember this being a pandemic. I'm with you on that one. You are muted, Cynthia.
I just said totally. Yeah, totally.
Dr. Fauci.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Tiart, members of the committee and staff for giving me the opportunity to discuss very briefly with you the role of the NIH basic and clinical research endeavor in the comprehensive approach mounted by the Department of Health and Human Services and other government agencies in addressing the very daunting problem of this extraordinary pandemic. As I've testified before this committee so many times in the past, that the mandate of the NIH is to do basic and clinical research in a variety of diseases for the purposes of today's discussion, infectious diseases in general and specifically influenza. As shown on this placard on the left-hand side on your right, we've done and continue to do fundamental basic research and clinical research to address countermeasures, both therapeutics, diagnostics, and vaccines. Today, we'll focus on vaccines. I hope during the period of questioning, we can get into the considerable investment that was really made possible by the generosity of this committee in giving us funds to do fundamental research to bring the technology, or as we call it, the vaccine platforms, into the 21st century to get beyond having to grow the virus, but to actually do it with 21st century technology.
Okay, did you notice how he was talking about platforms there? And instead of growing the virus, he was talking about it. It sounded like this new technology that they're implementing now, but he was talking about it during the last pandemic, which I find
the swine flu quote pandemic of 2009, right?
Right. So that's interesting. So this sounds like it's been in the works for a while.
And let's be clear,
the 21st century.
Let's be clear. I've heard of the swine flu. We're not saying the swine flu itself is
Right.
a Mandela effect. I just want to make sure we're clear to our audience on this one.
Thank you.
It's certain things about what happened during the time that they were calling this a pandemic. I don't remember it being called pandemic at the time either. Is what we're focusing on. So yeah, just to those that are wondering, no, we do remember the swine flu, as we've talked about in other episodes. Also, like the costume party that they had at the radio station at one time. But Anthony Fauci, I don't remember him all the way back in 2009. It is interesting, as you brought up, Shane, that he is talking about platforms, not growing the virus in an egg or whatever they used to use at the time to make traditional vaccination. So they've been working on this, like you said, for quite a long time.
Yeah, it's super interesting. So yeah, as far as the and another thing is the mask. So like the masks were a really big thing according to history. So that's another thing that's a huge Mandela effect for me, because I don't remember people wearing masks at least not in the United States. I remember clips of Asia where people were wearing masks over there, but definitely not out and about in my own country ever, you know.
And not pushing it like they clearly were at the time. That I don't remember that.
No, that's really strange for me.
Yeah, it gets even more bizarre as we go on with this whole 2009 swine flu pandemic that happened.
The next slide we have, like he said, it gets even more strange. You guys remember old Barack Obama? Hate him, love him, teach their own. And First Lady Michelle getting the swine flu vaccine. So we know they do these photo ops all the time. But I don't remember this push, as you said, for masks. I also don't remember a push for a swine flu vaccine and everybody to get this in 2009 either. What do you guys remember about this time period?
I would have remembered it because I also had children at that time, and I would be concerned for their well-being. Like, what's going on? Are they being required to get it? Is it recommended? I don't remember this at all. I don't remember a pandemic. I don't remember the the advocation from the president that everybody should get immunized and vaccinated. Don't remember that. This is very new to me.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, too, we'll play this in the post-production, but from the trailer, there were like multiple press conferences that Obama had, talking about the status of the vaccine rollout, all these things, telling everyone they should be vaccinated, et cetera. So that whole segment of history, again, is completely new for me.
I watched a lot of Obama speeches for various reasons, but the one thing I don't remember in his speeches was him pushing people to do vaccines, pushing people to go out and get vaccinated against this swine flu. I remember him doing the health insurance debacle that they put through. But I don't remember him coming to the platform multiple times saying, please go get a shot. Please go get a vaccine. That's new to me being recorded in history. You guys agree with that?
Yeah, totally.
100%.
Yeah, I definitely never remember that happening, but I can say that I just kind of remember, just yearly they'll make a big deal out of it, get your flu vax or whatever, but that's about all. I don't remember it getting pushed by the presidents or anything like that.
Right.
And I was very outspoken against flu vaccines at that time, especially. The more the conversation ramped up, the more I would go against it, of course. And the conversation for vaccines was starting to ramp up as far as get your flu vax, get your flu vax. I've never had either the flu or the vax. So there you go. But it's one thing for president to come out and say, hey, guys, can you do this? Was there a state of emergency issued? Do you guys remember any state of emergency issued in 2009 for this swine flu?
No, and it would have been alarming again, to hear about that, because one daughter's off to college. I'd just be concerned. When your family's not all together, it's like, oh, is she safe? But no, don't remember this.
So, go ahead, Chris.
I was going to say not only that, but like when the vaccine did start to get rolled out in the fall of 2009, people were waiting in line. There's all these news reports of like people waiting for 5 hours to get their shot. We'll insert some of these here as well. People were like waiting in line 5 hours to get their vaccine, and then they ran out. So people were there with it, especially it was like mostly kids, because they were really pushing for pregnant women and children to be vaccinated against the swine flu. So yeah, all these long lines, people like complaining, they waited for 5 hours, they couldn't get vaccinated, they have to come back again the following week, etc. Completely new for me, completely new.
So people don't even spend 5 hours standing in a general election line.
But what they did, I remember the lines for gas shortages when Jimmy Carter was president. I remember that in the 70s, but I don't remember this. And I would have, especially if people are getting turned away. That's news.
You just mentioned a state of emergency. The next slide shows.
If we go ahead and get right here.
So was he the only place that was that the only place that did that? It seems like that would have made enough news that it would have.
Schwarzenegger declared a state of emergency in California, nonetheless. The home of Miss Cynthia, correct, ma'am? So, you would have known that.
Yeah, born and raised in California. I've lived here most of my life. Small blip where I was in Switzerland, but otherwise, California. I would have heard about this. I did not hear about this. I mean, how could there be a state of emergency that was so under the radar that, people don't hear about it?
In the one state that it's actually in, apparently, right? Like, I can understand me being in Tennessee not knowing California did a state of emergency. I'll give it that one. But what about the people in California?
It was on the down low. No. I don't know.
And you guys out here in the audience, if you're from California especially, do you remember this? If you were a resident at the time, do you remember it being a state of emergency and then really pushing this in 2009? Again,
also,
I don't. Go ahead.
And Schwarzenegger, he was very famous worldwide. He has an international following. So if he did declare that, I'm sure now it says he did declare this state of emergency, it would have been picked up on the world news, not just California.
Absolutely.
I absolutely agree. Apparently, he went on to do press conferences and podcasts about this. Was podcasting even a thing in 2009?
There's a clip, and we'll play that clip, where he talks about how he's been creating, I believe he uses the words podcasts and YouTube videos or broadcasts. I could have gotten that wrong, but in any event, he was talking about how to protect yourself. It's the same as someone else somewhat famous on the next slide we're going to get to.
Oh, my God, Elmo.
Elmo.
Hi, everybody. I hope that you're listening to my radio address and watch my YouTube address, which this week is all about the swine flu and how to protect yourself. So watch it.
Yeah, so there you go. He doesn't use the word podcast. Yeah.
Yeah, YouTube. That's about the same time I started my YouTube channel too, right around then. So that was about right. That makes sense.
I don't remember him being all about this. That's so new to me. That's so strange. But
Very strange.
Shane mentioned there a moment ago, they even tried to get the kids involved in this, which is a move we see a lot by our governmental sources. Is one thing I noticed, and here's an offshoot. You can cut this out if you want later. One thing I noticed is when the government wants to pass something and they can't get it to go through, their last ditch effort is it's for the kids. We'll do it for the kids. So I've always known when they get to that point, they're really trying to pull some, at least in my professional opinion. But Elmo, they tried to get the kids involved with Elmo. It may have been past my Elmo time. I'll give it that. But I don't remember him pushing this. Is this new for all of us here on the panel?
I've never seen Elmo look that big, though. Is this Photoshopped? Because I got my kid to tickle me Elmo, and it was not. I mean, they would have loved that.
Well, apparently Elmo joined Miss Kathleen Sebelius, Lord help me if I did not pronounce that right, and spoke in May 2009 at a news conference about the N1H1 public service ads. Her and Elmo offer the swine flu prevention tips on Sesame Street. So this
I did not see this, but
sitting next to her. Sorry, Cynthia.
Shane's right about Elmo. It's bigger than the usual. I mean, this as shown here is much larger, kind of like blowing way up. But maybe we're having a Mandela effect here.
I'll add some intrigue to this particular photo. So there's a page on CNN that I found that mentioned the news conference, and it had this photo in it, and it had a link to actually watch the news conference. It's a broken link. Of course, it doesn't. You can't watch it. So, again, is this an issue with the timeline insertion being stitched in? All the data hasn't flowed in properly yet, but you're right. I don't remember Elmo being this big either. But this is actually from the CNN page.
Well, being that it's CNN, I know a lot of people are going to say, "Well, it's CNN. How do you expect that to even, have any kind of credibility?" However, when it comes to something like this, I would say this is something they would want to keep up, to push their agenda more.
So it doesn't stand for Credibility News Network?
I think there's a couple other C words you could put in place of that, but being that this is family friendly, I don't think we should go there.
Jerry.
Yeah, they're not known to be the most reliable source of information, as we know. But again, for those who would say, well, again, as CNN, they would get rid of the information. This is something they would want to keep because it fits their narrative. It's against this swine flu at the time, but the pandemic in itself is again something we're seeing repeated in our modern times. I would think that this is something they would want to keep up to show the kids, hey, see, Elmo back in this time was doing this. That's my opinion. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting too, because when I watched the little segment that Elmo and Gordon had, like I was wondering, are they gonna say wear face masks? Like what are they gonna say? But what they said just made sense. Like wash your hands, and if you're gonna sneeze, sneeze into your arm, kind of a thing. Which kind of makes it was more logical. So, but yeah, I don't remember any of this.
I don't remember the public service ads. If this was a campaign, it seems like, would have been bigger, or we would have seen something about it. But no, I don't remember this at all.
You've heard of tickle me Elmo, cover me Elmo. Sorry.
Don't sneeze on me, Elmo.
But yeah, again, this may have been out of our Elmo days, but I don't remember this at all.
Yeah, and the next slide talks about someone else that got involved in the whole 2009 pandemic, which was our now current president, Biden.
I knew that dude looked familiar.
That's right. A lot younger.
Kind of.
So we heard about the Obama response a moment ago. Apparently Biden was helping at the time, and I did hear this before, that he has a proven track record with pandemics, and I didn't understand what the news was saying at the time. I thought it was just more of the propaganda machine doing what the propaganda machine does. But yeah, I don't remember him being all that involved and outspoken with this thing.
Maybe that's the whole thing. He handled it so well, we've never heard of it, right?
This is Joe Biden we're talking about.
The first time around, right?
The first time around.
No, but no, this is strange to me. No.
Very strange.
And for some background, there's a Wall Street Journal video we could play. It's maybe about 3 minutes that kind of talks about Joe Biden and his history with the pandemic of 2009.
Let's take a look.
They will get this pandemic under control, like Joe did when he helped me manage H1N1.
Democratic National Convention speakers are claiming Joe Biden already has a proven track record of handling pandemics. But the reality of the Obama-Biden response to H1N1 in 2009 is somewhat different.
I wouldn't go anywhere in confined places now. It's not that it's going to Mexico. It's you're in a confined aircraft. When one person sneezes, it goes all the way through the aircraft.
Following that interview, airlines accused Biden of fear-mongering, and Biden's press team had to clear up his mess.
What the vice president meant to say was, if you are exhibiting symptoms, flu-like symptoms, limit your travel.
With all due respect, and I sympathize with you trying to explain the vice president's comments, but that's not even remotely close to what he said. He was asked about if a member of his family...
Jake, I understand what he said, and I'm telling you what he meant to say, which was that...
Democrats are also suggesting the Obama-Biden team did a better job with Ebola in 2014, despite the low risk of America ever having an outbreak.
Our leaders had worked hand in hand with scientists to help prevent an Ebola outbreak from becoming a global pandemic.
Barack Obama and Joe Biden did their job. Only 2 people in the United States died.
As it happens, the prior administration was simply lucky in that H1N1 was far less lethal than COVID-19.
It is 10 times more lethal than the seasonal flu. I think that's something that people can get their arms around and understand.
But less lethal than N1H1 or SARS?
No, absolutely not. H1N1 is even, the 2009 pandemic of H1N1 was even less lethal than the regular seasonal flu.
And even then, the Obama administration's handling of H1N1 was problematic. In particular, its botched job rolling out a vaccine.
We're nowhere near where we thought we'd be by now. We're not near where the vaccine manufacturers predicted we would be. And we share the frustration of people who have waited online or called a number or checked the website and haven't been able to find a place to get vaccinated.
Some years later, even Obama admitted his administration was fortunate.
We were lucky with H1N1, that it did not prove to be more deadly.
Take it from no less than Joe Biden's former chief of staff, who last year offered this description of the Obama-Biden response to H1N1.
What I would say about it is a bunch of really talented, really great people working on it, and we did every possible thing wrong. And it's, 60 million Americans got H1N1 in that period of time, and it's just purely a fortuity that this isn't one of the great mass casualty events in American history. Had nothing to do with us doing anything right. It just had to do with luck.
That's an interesting video there. I love if someone sneezes, it goes through the entire aircraft. Maybe he don't know how physics works.
I like how they tried to cover for his comments, though. Like, what he meant to say.
Not what he said. What we think.
What he should have said.
So, a proven track record with pandemics. Again, I don't remember him being all that active at the time in this role.
I think that's the point here, is we're noticing a Mandela effect in that regard, because otherwise we'd say, he's done this before, and we'd be concerned. Like, he kind of botched it last time, but nobody has mentioned that. And here we've got lots of evidence to suggest that there were some problems. You know.
That vaccine, am I incorrect in thinking that that's the one they had so many adverse reactions they had to pull back and just altogether stop that one? Is that the one?
No, that's actually, well, there were adverse reactions, and we're going to talk about that related to narcolepsy. But there were other vaccines that had other reactions, and we'll talk about that as well. And I wanted to point out, like when we were watching that video, there are 4 things that I spotted right away that we haven't brought out yet, or I haven't mentioned yet. One is they showed a clip of what you might have to wear, like they had like a bodysuit that had like the thing over the front of it and rubber boots and all that. I thought that was interesting. Fauci referred to the 2009 pandemic being more lethal than the current pandemic that we have, which I thought that was interesting as well. One of the reporters was talking about like everyone waiting in line, which is like another concept. None of us remember all the lines people were waiting in to get their vaccination, and how in 2009 the H1N1 affected 60 million Americans. At least that's what the news reporter said. So again, 60 million Americans got that I personally don't remember.
I know one person, and I know them now. I did not know them at the time, that says that they ended up with a case of that. But even still, one person out of everybody I've met all my life.
Yeah, and that's the way it'll work. There'll always be like people that, oh yeah, I remember I waited in line for like 2 days for 10 hours and I finally got vaccinated. There's definitely going to be people that remember that. Somebody in my office, I was talking to her about the swine flu, that pandemic that broke out in 2009. And she told me that her son, who would have been about 10 years old at the time, he got the swine flu. And I knew her really well back then. She still worked for me and we would talk every day. I don't have any memory of her telling me that at all. So to me, it was like, that's really interesting. But, the way these Mandela effects work, people will, depending on where their consciousness, or however you want to think of it, was coming from, they could have actually experienced that, or it's blended together with something else.
Or stitched in, as you so very eloquently put that.
Yeah, not a perfect stitching in. Because she also went on to say that her son sneezed on her directly, and she was like, "Oh my God, now I'm going to get it." And she's like, "But I never got it." But for something that's so highly contagious, if somebody with it directly sneezed on, so there's like things that just don't seem to make sense. But
well, this swine flu pandemic, again, I don't remember that specific wording choice. Pandemic.
Yeah, I do not remember that.
There was an outbreak. I remember the swine flu once again. I remember an outbreak of swine flu. I do not remember a pandemic of swine flu.
And we're catching this pandemic phraseology in most of these video clips, and it's amazing. Yeah, that's a huge change for me too.
As I remember, there weren't many pandemics, true pandemics, where people are actually passing away, things like that.
Right.
This
was the first, for me, this one that we're in now, the 2020, 2021, it's the first one since the Spanish influenza pandemic. And it really had been 100 years. And now suddenly that's not the case. And we've got all these little, are they mini pandemics? Not really, because they're affecting a lot of people. And it's qualified as pandemic. You're right.
It's even specifically qualified as pandemic by the WHO. If I can go ahead and get the next slide on screen, please, producer, who does a wonderful job back there. We appreciate you, Heather. The slide here, we're going to go through now a series of informational slides, folks. And we're going to kind of take turns reading these. In June 2009, the WHO declared H1N1 influenza pandemic. By October 2009, the new vaccines were rolled out across the world. And don't remember this. A similar story played out in the UK, with the Department of Health, British Medical Association, Royal College of GPs working hard to convince a reluctant NHS workforce to get vaccinated. I love that they put in there a reluctant NHS workforce. That sounds quite familiar to today. We fully support the swine flu vaccination program. The vaccine has been thoroughly tested, they declared in a joint statement, except it hadn't. This is from the British Medical Journal, 20th of September, 2018. I'm going to now throw this to Cynthia.
So it had been tested thoroughly, but hadn't? I mean, are we going to discuss these before we move on?
Yeah,
'Cause
we can,
that's pretty
sure.
interesting.
Okay.
Yeah, they said it had been thoroughly tested, and then that's not the case. That's not actually true. So they were doing this enforced rollout to, as Jerry just said, a reluctant workforce. And with the understanding, the workforce understood it's been thoroughly tested, no problem. But no, the British Medical Journal is saying it was not. So that is what it's saying.
So I'm wondering, because when I first discovered that we were they started declaring our current situation as a pandemic, I started looking into the actual definition of pandemic and saw how the wording of it kind of fit the wording, but it seemed like the wording was kind of laxed over what it had originally been. So I'm wondering if just by them changing that, or if that was a Mandela effect in itself, the wording, the definition itself for pandemic, if that might have trickled back in time and created these pandemics, because once they created this current situation called that, and then other situations in the past have fit that definition, perhaps that itself created. I don't know. It's just kind of a weird thought that popped in my head about the whole
Kind of
wording.
like
Pandemic.
the technology going back in time, the definition going back in time in this case, right?
It's a thought form. So yeah, if there's enough energy behind it and people believing in it, that could actually happen. It'd be an inadvertent kind of a timeline insertion, not by thoughtful conscious intent, but more like subconscious collective intent. That's fascinating, Shane. I like it.
Well, how much of that do you think, thank you, by the way, how much do you think is happening like that? Like it's what we're viewing as a byproduct, or instead of it being like a timeline insertion stitched in, we're seeing the effect of, like for instance, in the astronaut suit, we got these globules in the suit. Maybe that wasn't the insertion. Maybe the fact that the president getting sick was, and that was a consequence of that because he ended up meeting the people. Do you know what I'm saying? So how do we know where the butterfly effect occurred? You know what I'm saying? Like, what was the actual insertion, and what are we seeing as just sort of consequences of the insertion? Do you know what I mean?
It's tricky when we have lots of causal agents at work, and the interplay is so dynamic, and plus you've got retrocausal effects, so you can change history. Now that there's so much in play at that point, it can be tricky, especially with the subconscious component.
What I call this is time smear. For real. So say you have a time traveler who went back to a certain day. Now, I'm not saying this is time travel. I'm using time travel as the example. It goes back to one date and changes something. Then goes a little bit forward and changes something else. It goes a little bit forward and changes something else. Where was the original change? It's smeared across time. You don't know when it started, when it ended. It's somewhere in this range. And in this case, continues to go backwards in time. But that's pretty much seems to me what you're saying, Shane, is kind of a time smear. Where does it start? We'll never know, because that's kind of smeared across all of time.
Yeah, and these are, like, I've mentioned this before, but these are the types of problems they were having in Atlantis, for example, because once they discovered how to manipulate time and how to do time travel, it's almost like the concept where there's a big sports game and your team loses, but you realize if you just made one play a little bit differently, you could have won the game. So you introduce time travel, you make that play, but then something else happens where the quarterback gets knocked out and gets killed or something like that because of how you change. So there's a reverberation within time that creates timeline paradoxes and so forth. So this whole time stuff is not as stable as people would like it to believe, especially if things are being rushed. Like we need to do these timeline insertions now because of blah, blah, blah. So that they may not be doing it and stitching them in as properly as they should. And then they have to suffer the consequences of that, which could be negative or positive or both, or who knows. So
wibbly wobbly, timey wimey, right?
And I like that phrase that you use, Chris, about the hairball of timelines. That comes into play too.
Yeah, exactly. Hairballs.
And now let's take this concept a little bit further here. The timelines concept. Could it be that we're moving into timelines that have had these in their history more so than what we remember?
Yes, that's quite conceivable that this is exactly what's happening. And there are some philosophies, indigenous philosophies, and some of the holographic multiverse interpretations of quantum physics will support that these possibilities exist and that we can move between them. They're already there. So we're not creating them. They're there. And now we're just sort of wandering into it, looking at our history and saying, what is this? Like you're looking at a family photo that you've never seen, or your family member is telling you about something that you did and you sure don't remember it. And you certainly would have if it had happened in your childhood, but now not. It's that kind of thing. Yes.
That makes a lot of sense to me. Go ahead, Chris.
I was going to say I'll go like another angle to look at it too. I think if you think about the JFK assassination, and you think about the Zapruder film, key part of for the nation, the country, the world to understand what happened by being able to analyze that film. Well, it is possible that on perhaps one of the original timelines where he was assassinated, and I think there's timelines too where all the bullets missed him, which is another thing. But basically, what if Zapruder himself was a kind of chess move, because he had just gotten his brand new Bell and Howell fancy 8mm movie camera. And I remember reading the story about his secretary. He's talking to his secretary. What am I going to do with this gift? I've never used a camera before. And she's like, well, the president's coming into town. Why don't you film him? So just by chance, he happened to go there, record what actually happened, which allowed people, instead of just hearing the mainstream media saying that the president was shot, now we had evidence. We could see what happened frame by frame. We could analyze it, and it could at least have caused doubts as to the official story and something else behind it. So again, these reverberations back in time are very, very interesting in how they actually will change history going forward.
I fully agree. So let's get back to our slides here real quick so we don't get too far out of the bounds of the topic.
Yes.
Cynthia, I'm going to go ahead and hand this over to you, ma'am.
Yeah, we got another quote from the British Medical Journal. This is also 20th September 2018, and they're covering back in time. In October 2009, the United States National Institutes of Health Infectious Diseases chief Anthony Fauci appeared on YouTube to reassure Americans about the safety of the swine flu vaccine. And here's a quote: "The track record for serious adverse events is very good. It's very, very, very rare that you ever see anything that's associated with the vaccine that's a serious event," he said. We can go to the next slide, and Chris, you can read the next one. Please. Thank you.
Again, this is from the British Medical Journal, September 20th, 2018. Anticipating a severe pandemic, governments around the world made logistical and legal arrangements to shorten the time between recognition of a pandemic virus and the production and administration of that vaccine in the population. In Europe, one element of those plans was an agreement to grant licenses to pandemic vaccines based on data from pre-pandemic mock-up vaccines produced using a different virus, H5N1 influenza. So very interesting.
Say what?
And Shane, yeah, next slide there.
Well, another element adopted by countries such as Canada, the US, UK, France, and Germany was to provide vaccine manufacturers indemnity from liability for wrongdoing, thereby reducing the risk of reducing the risk of lawsuits stemming from vaccine-related injuries. So that was in 2018?
That's actually newer than I thought it was. I thought they had that.
I thought that happened back in like the 80s or something.
Yeah.
Are they just talking about it?
Yeah, this is different too. So it seems very interesting. Yeah, now it's saying that this was all much more recent. So the article here is a 2018 article, but it's talking about activities that took place, back in 2009. So now they can say things more clearly, apparently. But what it's describing is something I'd never heard about. I'd never heard about the declaration that the vaccine is safe. It's been fully tested when it hadn't. All of this, it's just like new to me. And this is worldwide because it's being reported by the British Medical Journal. So they're focusing, of course, in England, but it's a worldwide epidemic. It's a pandemic, again, new to us. And lawsuits in the United States, United Kingdom, France, and Germany. This is pretty amazing that worldwide you can't sue these companies. They're above the law. I did not know that this is huge.
Yeah, I thought like Shane was saying, I'm sorry, that was before the 2000s. Like I thought they had that anti-liability thing way long ago, not as new as 09, apparently, what they're talking about here. And you mentioned it was all over the world. Canada, the US, UK, France, and Germany were all in this together. So once again, we're talking worldwide. And just to be clear, again, I want to remind everybody, we're not saying we don't remember the swine flu itself. We don't remember certain things within this swine flu activity that has went on.
Right. Yeah, it's quite a little interesting business relationship, right? About how you can't, if you're a doctor and you botch up an operation on someone, they usually have some way to say hey, monetary
damage for wrongdoing, right?
Yeah,
Medical malpractice.
But with the vaccines, they're completely off the hook. Yeah.
So it opens up the question, why was this decision made? In which timeline? At what point in time were these pharmaceutical companies, why was the consensus decision that they are above the law? I think that's very interesting. Just leave it to the audience. What do you think?
Not speaking from an IMEC point of view, but from a personal point of view, that scares me a lot. I don't know about you guys, but the fact that if I go get a vaccine and I have a very adverse reaction to it, they're not liable at all. That's kind of scary to me. Just saying.
Yeah, it is.
Speaking of side effects, there were some side effects to this 2009 swine flu vaccine. Side effects that, once again, I had not heard of. And the reason this is important is because when it comes to children, I think we would have heard something to this degree, right? To what degree am I speaking? 2009 swine flu vaccine linked to narcolepsy in children. What do you know about this, Chris?
Yeah, this is really interesting. We do have a video clip we could play of a news report. Maybe we'll do that first, and we can discuss it from there.
A 5-year-old girl is dealing with 2 very rare neurological disorders that some fear may have been brought on by something that was meant to protect her.
ABC 7's Horace Holmes explains how it could all be traced back to the swine flu outbreak.
At first glance, 5-year-old Journey Washington appears to be a happy, healthy young lady, but behind her hearty laugh lurks a frightening disease that strikes unexpectedly.
Journey, you tired? It's been devastating. It really has.
Betty Washington is still learning how to cope with the twin conditions that plague her young daughter, narcolepsy, a neurological disorder that causes its victim to become drowsy and then suddenly fall asleep, and cataplexy, where strong emotions cause sudden muscle weakness.
These kids are fighting sleepiness every minute of the day.
Pediatric sleep expert Dr. Judith Owens says narcolepsy and cataplexy in very young children was almost unheard of a decade ago.
How do you keep yourself awake?
LaShawn Ray was diagnosed with narcolepsy in 2009.
She'd be sitting at the dinner table eating and just fall right to sleep with food in her mouth.
In 2009, in response to the H1N1 or swine flu outbreak, several vaccines to stop the spread of the H1N1 were put on the market, and the number of narcolepsy cases soon shot up.
I would say I'm about 70% convinced, and I think it's very important that we understand whether that link is real or not.
Scientists in Europe have confirmed a link between the H1N1 vaccine used there with narcolepsy in children, but here in the U.S., the Centers for Disease Control says it has found no association between our H1N1 vaccine and narcolepsy.
I had to quit working a full-time job to
to work part-time just to be able to accommodate doctor's appointments.
Journey Washington took the U.S. vaccine in 2009, and her mother says 7 months later she started showing symptoms of narcolepsy. Dr. Owens reminds us that the vast majority of children who get vaccines have no side effects at all. And LaShawn Ray, along with Children's Medical Center, has started a support group for families with children with narcolepsy. You can find it by clicking onto our website at WJLA.com.
All right, Horace, thank you.
Yes, so that one was really interesting because it shows a link between children that were vaccinated coming down with narcolepsy. And, you know, in Europe, they said that they saw the link, but the CDC in the United States said there's no link, like look away. But still people were coming down with children coming down with narcolepsy at in unprecedented amounts. So that's why, like, if anyone says something is safe and effective for something like this, it seems to me it takes at least 5 years to show if there are any adverse reactions, right? So, right. And I just wanted to add one more thing from my point of view. So a lot of illnesses and things like that, depending on how you look at them, you might say they have something to do with our spirituality or something on another level, higher frequency, etc. So the whole thing about narcolepsy is about falling asleep. So could that be this is a question that I'm asking out loud, could there be a link between physically falling asleep and spiritually falling asleep? And could that be the reason why maybe younger people, or why the government was so pro to have small children and pregnant women to be vaccinated? Like, could there have been another thing, maybe for these amazing times, for people not to be able to, like, we'll call it awaken and see the reality of what's going on around them? So these are the types of questions that I ask myself.
Another question is about the cataplexy and the concept of strong emotions leading to muscle weakness. So these are two I mean, it seems like that's very interesting as well. So is that something who would want that for the populace, is for people to be basically shut down if they start feeling strong emotions?
Well, let me take a different twist on that. We know manifestation is based on intent and emotion. We know that for fact. In your work especially, I'm sure that's been your findings. We also know that meditation, sleep, things like that, the dream state also tends to have an effect on reality. So if you can control who goes into the dream state, if you can have a majority dreaming, not actively physically manifesting, you could more control what the dream would be, what they would be manifesting, because they don't have a consciousness to them. Their consciousness is broken up into these dream states. Diabolical at the very least, in my opinion. Let me also ask you, Chris, speaking of that, you said it took 7 months after they injected the kids with these vaccines for them to show symptoms.
I think that's what it said in the news report, actually. Yeah, they started 5 or 7 months later. Yeah.
So it wasn't immediate. So it took a while for the long-term data of that to come in. Is that correct?
That's the way it appears, yeah.
So with children getting vaccines, there might not be anything that happens immediately, but there may be a lot of long-term data with this current vaccine that we just don't know yet, especially with them trying to now give it to kids. Just something I wanted to point out there.
Yeah, that's a great point that you're bringing up, because it just begs the question of, and I wonder this myself, like, is it really worth, if you don't know, what the long-term effects of this is, and really it seems that the virus isn't, or what they're calling this, whatever this is going around, doesn't seem to affect kids very much, so it's like, I don't know, you got to weigh your own options of if it's even worth the risk, because to me it doesn't seem like seems like to me it's almost exactly the opposite of what we should be doing. But I don't know.
And
maybe
remember,
I'm not
a moment ago, we learned that they're not liable. If anything bad does happen, we just learned they're not liable at all for it.
No, I just imagine the children's immunity seems to be, it's going to be more evolved than the older people. So I would just trust their immunity over whatever, they're experimenting.
When I was a kid, we ate dirt. I mean, let's be clear. When I was a kid, being dirty was okay. You ingested these different viri and bacteria and these different elements that your immune system, yes, ladies and gentlemen, we have that in our bodies, would actually build an immunity to these things. So, yes, kids have a growing immune system. That's a fair argument, but I would also say a more robust immune system. As we've seen across all of the animal kingdom, the children tend to have that more robustness within them, generally speaking.
And getting better oxygen and more sunlight is only going to help their natural immunity, I would think. So that's why it seems like everything's kind of backwards from what I was even raised, what we're taught in school about things.
I cannot disagree with that even a little bit. It's like they're trying to change the narrative if I didn't know any better. Just saying. And perhaps if they are the ones behind it, this is again a very perhaps. This isn't a set in stone thing by any means, but if they are the one behind this and they are changing the narrative, then how much of that narrative will get time smeared backwards? How much are we going to find showing up in the past again?
Oh, that's a great segue. I sense maybe some time travel coming.
Yeah.
Oh, what?
Are we going to time travel again?
I think it is time. Let's fire up the time circuits of the TARDIS and get to rolling. There it is. God, I love that sound. We're going to be traveling from 2009 and 10 all the way back this time to 1976. There we go. We have arrived in 1976. An outbreak of the swine flu influenza A virus, subtype H1N1 at Fort Dix, New Jersey, caused 1 death, hospitalized 13, and led to a mass immunization program. Once again, we see this immunization program. You guys want to go ahead with this one?
I just wanted to say, when you guys think about the swine flu, is it the swine flu from 1976 you're thinking of, or was it the swine flu from 2009? No, seriously, because to me, it's kind of rings a bell about 76, but it wasn't really a big deal. I don't know how you guys felt about that.
They're both new to me. The whole thing is wacky, wild, and weird.
I don't remember the 1970s again having a pandemic, a swine flu. It's like almost since the 60s, every decade or so, it's like they've tried to throw a new version of this in. The H1N1 back in 76, I didn't hear of H1N1 to what, 90s, 2000s maybe?
Yeah, and keep in mind too, what happened in 76 wasn't a pandemic. It was very, very minor, like 1 death, 13 hospitalized. But they tried to launch one of the biggest vaccination programs ever. I think that's kind of the takeaway from all this.
So what we're seeing today isn't the first time, according to this timeline, that they've tried to do a mass population vaccination. And this isn't their first run, right?
Yeah, according to Wikipedia, 25% of the population had been administered the vaccine. The same vaccine that President Ford here is shown taking getting his injection is the same one that 25% of the population in 1970.
I was alive then. I was a child, a little girl, teenager, but I don't remember this. And I was watching the news. It's not like I was not living in a cave or something. I was aware of news, or what was happening. I do not remember this at all.
Well, my favorite part of this is something else that I don't remember going back into the 70s, something else I don't even remember coming into my conception until, again, the 90s, maybe even early 2000s, and that is the side effect of this particular vaccine called Guillain-Barré syndrome. As a matter of fact, I would like to stop right here and point out that Guillain-Barré syndrome, I don't remember this spelling. When we were discussing this in the emails, I think I threw something in here about that. I don't remember, but I don't remember it being B-R or B-A-R-R -E, a syllabalized E. I remember it being B-R-A-E, Guillain-Barré, not Barré, but Bray syndrome. That could be a personal thing. Perhaps I'm wrong about that. Perhaps I didn't understand the spelling. I'm not 100, but I seen the spelling and went, wait a minute, that doesn't click with me. Am I the only one?
To me, it looks the same as it used to, but I've never known how to pronounce it properly.
Yeah, doesn't it basically mean like just the French version of polio? Am I oversimplifying it?
I believe it was named after the scientist actually that found it, the French scientist.
Okay.
Let me go ahead and do a quick look here.
No, for me, I'd only heard it pronounced. I've never seen it written, so I can't really chime in on the writing. That's strange that we all have our own perspectives, but that's how it is, isn't it, with everything? Like I've heard it but not seen it, and that's funny.
I was going to say too that for this slide, we actually have, the 60 Minutes piece, which was 15 minutes ago, that we wanted to like play and like, interrupt from certain times, because I think this is like really important because Judy Roberts, she was, we'll find out. I don't want to give it all away, but as we watch the video, we'll find out more about who she was and why 60 Minutes did this whole expose that was featuring her.
The flu season is upon us. Which type will we worry about this year? And what kind of shots will we be told to take? Remember the swine flu scare of 1976? That was the year the U.S. government told us all that swine flu could turn out to be a killer that could spread across the nation. And Washington decided that every man, woman, and child in the nation should get a shot to prevent a nationwide outbreak, a pandemic. Well, 46 million of us obediently took the shot. And now 4,000 Americans are claiming damage.
Yeah, so just keep in mind some of the things he's talking about. He's using the term pandemic. 46 million people got the vaccine back then. So those are just some key points that already he's talking about that, again, I was a kid back then and I don't remember any of this.
And the government back then pushed for every man, woman, and child, as he put it, to get the vaccine at the time. Sounds disturbingly similar.
Yeah, I should have gotten the vaccine, but I did not. I didn't hear about this. It wasn't a big thing, but it should have been. I was like a teenager, between middle school, high school. So this is very strange.
From Uncle Sam amounting to $3.5 billion because of what happened when they took that shot. By far the greatest number of the claims, 2/3 of them, are for neurological damage or even death, allegedly triggered by the flu shot. We pick up the story back in 1976 when the threat posed by the swine flu virus seemed very real indeed.
This virus was the cause of a pandemic in 1918 and 1919 that resulted in over 500,000 deaths in the United States, as well as 20 million deaths around the world.
See how easy it is to...
Thus, the U.S. government's publicity machine was cranked into action to urge all America to protect itself against the swine flu menace.
Influenza is serious business. During major flu epidemics, millions of people are sick and thousands die. Well, this year you can get protection. The vaccines are safe, easy to take, and they can protect you against flu. So roll up your sleeve. Protect yourself.
One of those who did roll up her sleeve was Judy Roberts. She was perfectly healthy, an active woman, when in November of 1976, she took her shot. 2 weeks later, she says, she began to feel a numbness starting up her legs.
I joked about it at that time. I said, I'll be numb to the knees by Friday if this keeps up. By the following week, I was totally paralyzed.
So completely paralyzed, in fact, that they had to operate on her to enable her to breathe. And for 6 months, Judy Roberts was a quadriplegic. The diagnosis? A neurological disorder called Guillain-Barré syndrome, GBS for short. These neurological diseases are little understood. They affect people in different ways. As you can see in these home movies taken by a friend, Judy Roberts' paralysis confined her mostly to a wheelchair for over a year. But this disease can even kill. Indeed, there are 300 claims now pending from the families of GBS victims who died, allegedly as a result of the swine flu shot. In other GBS victims, the crippling effects diminish and all but disappear. But for Judy Roberts, progress back to good health has been painful and partial. Now, I noticed that your smile, Judy, is a little bit constricted.
Yes, it is.
Is it different from what it used to be?
Very different. I have a greatly decreased mobility in my lips. And I can't drink through a straw on the right-hand side. I can't blow out birthday candles. I don't whistle anymore, for which my husband is grateful.
It may be a little difficult for you to answer this question, but have you recovered as much as you are going to recover?
Yes, this is it.
So you will now have a legacy of braces on your legs for the rest of your life?
Yes, the weakness in my hands will stay, and the leg braces will stay.
So Judy Roberts and her husband have filed a claim against the U.S. government. They're asking $12 million, though they don't expect to get nearly that much. Judy, why did you take the flu shot?
I'd never taken any other flu shots, but I felt like this was going to be a major epidemic. And the only way to prevent a major epidemic of a really deadly variety of flu was for everybody to be immunized.
Where did this so-called deadly variety of flu, where did it first hit back in 1976? It began right here at Fort Dix in New Jersey in January of that year when a number of recruits began to complain of respiratory ailments, something like the common cold. An Army doctor here sent samples of their throat cultures to the New Jersey Public Health Lab to find out just what kind of bug was going around here. One of those samples was from a Private David Lewis who had left his sickbed to go on a forced march. Private Lewis had collapsed on that march, and his sergeant had...
Are those soldiers wearing face masks? Is my... Or is it just bad video quality? I thought on some of them when they were
I
marching.
think it's bad video quality with the chin strap holding the helmet on.
Yeah, like right
Yeah,
here.
they got chin straps, I think.
Okay, all right.
David Lewis, who had left his sickbed to go on a forced march. Private Lewis had collapsed on that march, and his sergeant had revived him by mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. But the sergeant showed no signs of illness. A few days later, Private Lewis died.
If this disease is so potentially fatal that it's going to kill a young, healthy man, a middle-aged school teacher doesn't have prayer.
The New Jersey lab identified most of those soldiers' throat cultures as the normal kind of flu virus going around that year, but they could not make out what kind of virus was in the culture from the dead soldier and from 4 others who were sick. So they sent those cultures to the Federal Center for Disease Control in Atlanta, Georgia, for further study. A few days later, they got the verdict: swine flu. But that much publicized outbreak of swine flu at Fort Dix involved only Private Lewis, who died, and those 4 other soldiers who recovered completely without the swine flu shot.
If I had known at that time that the boy had been in a sick bed, got up, went out on a forced march, and then collapsed and died, I would never have taken the shot.
The rationale for our recommendation was not on the basis of the death of a single individual, but it was on the basis that when we do see a change in the characteristics of the influenza virus, it is a massive public health problem in this country.
Dr. David Senser, then head of the CDC, the Center for Disease Control in Atlanta, is now in private industry. He devised the swine flu program, and he pushed it. You began to give flu shots to the American people in October of '76.
October 1st.
By that time, how many cases of swine flu around the world had been reported?
There had been several reported, but none confirmed. There had been cases in Australia that were reported by the press, by the news media. There were cases in...
None confirmed. Did you ever uncover any other outbreaks of swine flu anywhere in the world?
No.
Now, nearly everyone was to receive the shot in a public health facility where a doctor...
So there wasn't like a big death count. In fact, he's even grasping to say that there are possible few other people somewhere on the world that actually may have gotten it, but not confirmed.
And the only
That's the
place
thing,
you
not
seen the
confirmed.
reports was the news media. And I like the fact that he threw in there not confirmed. We just heard them through the news media.
Exactly. And yet the media was able to convince, I have it written down somewhere, but a large amount, 46 million people to be vaxxed, if I have this one right.
That is correct. 46 million. I copied the number 2.
Yeah. So, but the number of deaths was not dramatic. So
I think it was like 1.
It was just 1. Right.
that one guy on the forced march in January. Yeah, January 76.
And then when they give them the vaccine, that's when the deaths and the adverse side effects really started to show up once again.
Yeah, so doesn't it show you the power of the media, especially back then? Like people like totally consume the news. Like if it's on the news, it's real, and we got to take action, et cetera. So just if anything, too, I get to take away about how powerful the media has and what a responsibility it has, for people that watch the news.
And Judy Roberts said that she had never had any kind of vaccination or immunization and wouldn't have if she'd known the truth about the one death that he'd been on a forced march.
The news that I call the propaganda machine is definitely got a responsibility that they have neglected for much longer than I realized too. And again, we see these reports were never substantiated. They were news reports. And the news chooses who and what they report on to hold a narrative. A lot of us know that now. For those that don't, here's more evidence. Something else I thought of while we were watching that, and this is all conjecture and speculation at this point. It was on Fort Dix. Now that's a little bit of a red flag for me that the first case was in a military base. Aside from the name of the base,
the only cases, right?
Yes, sir. It's almost as if it was
the only unconfirmed cases. There were no confirmed cases.
Right.
We need to
If I
reiterate
didn't
that.
know any better, I mean, just from a investigative point of view, I would say it possibly was released on that base. They didn't say they came in from elsewhere overseas and brought it to the base. It just suddenly cropped up on the base.
Well, did they use PCR tests back then? I mean, that could have.
Right.
Right.
It's like they suddenly had been working on something of this nature. Again, this is conjecture and speculation. This is not speaking for as I know something.
That's a good question, though.
Right. The question being, did they release it in order to make the forthgoing what we would see with vaccines and so on and so forth?
These are good questions. And the reason 60 Minutes can run this show, I think, is because there was just that one death. And then all these, one death related to the original, whatever it was, swine flu, and then all of the subsequent injury related to the vaccination.
And we know that it's at least even with the deaths in this Guillain-Barré syndrome, because they said that some people have died from it. And if only one person died from the original reason they were giving out the vax to begin with, then it's like the vaccine isn't even, why are they giving it out, right?
Yeah, I think they said that 300 people died as a result of the vaccine. So one person at Fort Dix died from it, but then 300 out of the 46 million. Now it's still like a small number out of the 46 million, but still it doesn't matter, right?
Oh, yeah.
That's 300 lives.
300 people that have it's not injured, that's death.
Right. That's not considering the injured ones. And we're looking at the same sort of thing right now, too. I mean,
and they're talking about, and they had 4,000 lawsuits, but you know that the number of actual injuries has got to be greater because not everybody wants to go deal with all that. They're already dealing with the damage that in their lives. Not everybody wants to go through with a lawsuit. So 4,000 lawsuits, that's highly indicative of a serious problem.
And you bring a point that is super valid right there, Miss Cynthia. The fact that it is just 4,000 as is reported. So let's put this into a modern day perspective, shall we? We have something now called the VAERS reporting system. This is where you're supposed to report the adverse reactions of vaccines, namely this one we have right now, this vaccine, for lack of a better term. So if you're looking at 4,000 reports back then, and that's only what got reported, we have hundreds of thousands of VAERS reports, and that's just what got reported. Just something to keep in mind.
I mean, and even the deaths, I think we're up over, according to the official CDC numbers with the current vaccine, we're up in the teens at least. Of thousands, teens of thousands of deaths.
Right, absolutely. And this introduced a new problem into society also, because before that, I don't really believe there was a large uptick in the Guillain-Barré syndrome, right?
I think that's true. I think this is the first big uptick was related to the swine vaccine.
Which is what we saw with this narcolepsy, and what was the other catalepsy or
cataplexy.
Cataplexy. Yeah, with those two, they were saying how that was a new thing amongst kids that they hadn't. The one lady was saying she hadn't seen that, and then after there's like this surge afterwards. So we're seeing, once again that it looks like there's a direct connection, and where it's been 9 months, 7 months for some of these connections, people aren't even making them now. So where we're seeing like she understood it was the vaccine. There's people now that are having adverse reactions, and they're not associating it with the vaccine because they're not promoting it that way, or the doctor's not telling them that, or the doctor might be telling them it's not that when they go in. It's
or the news media, once again, telling the people one thing opposed to the reality of the situation, right?
Mm-hmm.
She passed away, unfortunately, in 2010 from cancer. But before that, in 2009, when all this came up, she became a loud voice.
I think there's more video. We could roll the rest of the 60 minutes.
Yeah.
I think we're...
There might not be present. Therefore, it was up to the CDC to come up with some kind of official consent form, giving the public all the information it needed about the swine flu shot. This form stated that the swine flu vaccine had been tested. What it didn't say was that after those tests were completed, the scientists developed another vaccine, and that was the one given to most of the 46 million who took the shot. That vaccine was called X53A. Was X53A ever field tested?
I can't say. I would have to...
It wasn't.
I don't know.
Well, I would think that you're in charge of the program.
I would have to check the records. I haven't looked at this in some time.
The information form, the consent form, was also supposed to warn people about any risks of serious complications following the shot. But did it?
No, I had never heard of any reactions other than a sore arm, fever, this sort of thing.
Judy Roberts' husband, Gene, also took the shot.
Yes, I looked at that document. I signed it. Nothing on there said I was going to have a heart attack or I can get Guillain-Barré, which I never heard of.
What if people from the government, from the Center for Disease Control, what if they had indeed known about it? What would be your feeling?
They should have told us.
Did anyone ever come to you and say, you know something, fellas? There's the possibility of neurological damage if you get into a mass immunization program?
No.
No one ever did?
No.
Do you know Michael Hatwick?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Dr. Michael Hatwick directed the surveillance team for the swine flu program at the CDC. His job was to find out what possible complications could arise from taking the shot and to report his findings to those in charge. Did you know ahead of time, Dr. Hatwick, that there had been case reports of neurological disorders, neurological illness, apparently associated with the injection of influenza vaccine?
Absolutely.
You did?
Yes.
How'd you know that?
By review of the literature.
So you told your superiors, the men in charge of the swine flu immunization program, about the possibility of neurological disorders?
Absolutely.
What would you say if I told you that your superiors say that you never told them about the possibility of neurological complications?
That's nonsense. I can't believe that they would say that they did not know that there were neurological illnesses associated with influenza vaccination. That simply is not true. We did know that.
I've said that Dr. Hatwick had never told me of his feelings on this subject.
Then he's lying.
I guess you would have to make that assumption.
Then why does this report from your own agency, dated July 1976, list neurological complications as a possibility?
I think the consensus of the scientific community was that the evidence relating neurologic disorders to influenza immunization was such that they did not feel that this association was a real one.
You didn't feel it was necessary to tell the American people that information?
I think that over the years we have tried to inform the American people as fully as possible.
As part of informing Americans about the swine flu threat, Dr. Sensor's CDC also helped create the advertising to get the public to take the shot. Let me read to you from one of your own agency's memos planning the campaign to urge Americans to take the shot. The swine flu vaccine has been taken by many important persons, he wrote. Example, President Ford, Henry Kissinger, Elton John, Muhammad Ali, Mary Tyler Moore, Rudolph Nureyev, Walter Cronkite, Ralph Nader, Edward Kennedy, etc., etc. True?
I'm not familiar with that particular piece of paper, but I do know that at least of that group, President Ford did take the vaccination.
Did you talk to these people beforehand to find out if they planned to take the shot?
I did not know.
Did anybody?
I do not know.
Did you get permission to use their names in your campaign?
I do not know.
Mary, did you take a swine flu shot?
No, I did not.
Did you give them permission to use your name saying that you had or were going to?
Absolutely not. Never did.
Did you ask your own doctor about taking the swine flu shot?
Yes, and at the time he thought it might be a good idea. But I resisted it because I was leery of having the symptoms that sometimes go with that kind of inoculation.
So you didn't?
No, I didn't.
Have you spoken to your doctor since?
Yes.
And?
He's delighted that I didn't take that shot.
You're in charge. Somebody's in charge.
There are...
This is your advertising strategy that I have a copy of here.
Who's it signed by?
This one is unsigned. But you'll acknowledge that it was your baby, so to speak.
It could have been from Department of Health, Education, and Welfare. It could be from CDC. I don't know. I'll be happy to take responsibility for it.
It's been 3 years now since you fell ill with GBS, right?
Right.
Has the federal government, in your estimation, played fair with you about your claim?
No, I don't think so. It seems to be dragging on and on and on. And really, no end in sight that I can see at this point.
With respect to the cases of Guillain-Barré, allegedly...
Former Secretary of HEW Joseph Califano, too, was disturbed that there was no end in sight. So a year and a half ago, he promised that Uncle Sam would cut the bureaucratic red tape for victims suffering from GBS and would pay up quickly.
We shouldn't hold them to an impossible or too difficult standard of proving that they were hurt. Even if we pay a few people a few $1,000s that might not have deserved it, I think justice requires that we promptly pay those people who do deserve it.
Who's making the decision to be so hard-nosed about settling?
Well, I assume the Justice Department is.
Griffin Bell before he left?
Well, the Justice Department agreed to the statement I made. It was cleared word for word with the lawyers in the Justice Department by my HEW lawyers.
And that statement said, in effect...
That statement said that we should pay Guillain-Barré claims without regard to whether the federal government was negligent if they resulted from the swine flu shot.
I think the government knows it's wrong.
If it drags out long enough, that people will just give up. Let it go.
I am a little more adamant in my thoughts than my wife is, because I told Judy to take the shot. She wasn't going to take it, and she never had shots. And I'm mad with my government because they knew the facts, but they didn't release those facts because if they had released them, the people wouldn't have taken. And they can come out tomorrow and tell me there's going to be an epidemic, and they can drop off like flies next to me. I will not take another shot that my government tells me to take.
Meantime, Judy Roberts and some 4,000 others like her are still waiting for their day in court.
Wow.
Can I just say, like, Mike Wallace, what a good reporter he was, right?
Yeah, back then they had reporters that would actually tell the truth. They would be the government's watchdog and not their lapdog.
Yeah, exactly. And, if somebody is wrong with something, like let's say somebody actually does have true misinformation, let it get out there and be proven wrong, right? The truth can't hide. You shine a light on the truth, it's going to stay the truth, so to speak. So, yeah, so the whole thing about people having to be really cautious about what they say and, et cetera, we're living in really crazy times. I just want to throw that out. So go Mike Wallace. I love that.
It's not, and it's like we're even moving into an era where it's almost, you'll be like even framed as anti-government or something if you say the wrong thing. You know what I mean? Which
exactly,
just having an opinion about something, they can just frame you in the darkest of light just for asking a question.
Well, I like that it shows even way back then, even though 60 Minutes was actually doing its job, the rest of the news media has not changed all that much, as well as the government, even to this day. New faces, same game.
Yeah, and who knows? Maybe even that 60 Minutes segment could have been a timeline insertion. I mean, I used to watch 60 Minutes.
That's what I'm thinking. That's to me, it looks like this came in just to balance things out and to show us, hang in there. Mary Tyler Moore, you know, she held strong. When you have a feeling intuitively, trust yourself. Even if your doctor is really pushing on you and the government's pushing on you and everybody, social pressure from all directions, trust your intuition. And I love that she did.
Like her husband said, if my government says take it and people are literally falling out around me, I will not do it.
That's Judy Roberts' husband. Yeah.
Yeah, and also think of the guilt he has, you know, for like advising her to get it, and how many, you know, are advising people now, you know, with this current one. So, like my daughter asked me about it, I'm like, you know what, you can always find another job. I'm like, you know, I would just wait it out. Don't do anything that you can't take back. You can always decide to go get it, but you can't really decide not or to unget it or whatever. But you can always find another job. And she says, well, what if I can't? And I explained to her that, well, if you have an adverse reaction and you're not able to work, you know, then, you know, you can find anything to do for, you know, just work.
That's one thing I found really
business.
ridiculous with these offers that are being put on the table by different businesses. Well, if you get a shot, we'll give you a free meal, or we'll give you a YMCA membership, or how much is your life worth? Are you willing to put a number on your life? $100 if you get the shot. Really, my life's worth just a bit more than $100. At least I think I am.
Or the
I want to say something for those who have received a jab and now they're watching this and they're starting to freak out, or they know someone who has, their daughter, their son, their grandchild, their parents, whatever. Don't panic, because we can shift reality. We do it all the time. So even if this has happened, I've been through COVID, I've been through long COVID. You can turn things around. So don't get hopeless, you know. So I think from the IMEC point of view, you can work with your own timelines and, you know, don't panic.
I fully agree. Could not have said that better. Yeah, I don't want to those that are vaccinated think we're picking on them or in any way trying to shine light on them. We're not at all. Just shining light on the situation as it may be in relation to Mandela effect.
Yes.
Right.
Cynthia, go ahead, sir.
I was going to say too, one of the things about the video too is about when they were when Mike Wallace was interviewing, I think he was the director of the CDC at the time, he was talking about how they were going to advertise it, the planning campaign, the strategy they were going to use for the public, and how they were enlisting or using the names of celebrities like Elton John and Mary Tyler Moore they didn't get the shots, but the government was saying that they did. So that again shows like a certain level of, it would have put chinks in the armor, so to speak. So people would be like, wait, if they watch that 60 Minutes, like the government flat out lied about Mary Tyler Moore? Like, how could they do that? You know, so these are all these little things add up to a possible counter timeline insertion event of this, and what we're going to talk about next with one other woman.
Speaking of, ladies and gentlemen, let's fire the time circuits up just one last time. God, I cannot get over how much I love that Doctor Who sound. The TARDIS is in full effect, ladies and gentlemen, and we are arriving now in 2020, a time which we all have remembered pretty well. It wasn't that long ago, right? Chris, go ahead and cover this slide for me, my friend.
Yeah, so this is about a woman named Brandy Vaughn. Now, I had never heard about her until earlier this year, probably around March of 2021. I'd never heard of her before. I'm not saying that she's a Mandela effect or a timeline insertion. I didn't know. But she was a prominent anti-vaccination activist. She used to work for Merck Pharmaceuticals, which was one of the big pharma companies. And she became an insider. She was self-educated, so to speak. And after she was discovering all these things she was learning, she became an advocate against vaccination, or at least having people having an education about it. So There is a video that we can play from her. This is from a presentation she gave in 2000, I believe it was around 2017. And then we could play this and then like stop it at different points to discuss it. But again, very outspoken, and it'll give us an idea of who Brandy Vaughn was.
All right, pharma, vaccines, and you. I'm here to tell you today how everything that's coming through with the agenda for vaccines and how it's going to affect you and how we're going to stop this. A lot of you have heard about the mandates. One of the reasons I'm so excited to be here in front of you today is because I am among a very friendly crowd, a crowd that is fighting on the front lines of health in this country, trying to make this country a better place. And I'm among a lot of people who are probably called crazy as much as I am. And that's awesome, because you know what? We are crazy. We are crazy enough to think that we can change the world. And we need to. And we are going to be the ones who do it. Every single person in this room is here for a reason. We are the ones who have that mission, all of us. We are the army that this world needs so that we see better health and our children have a better world. In fact, this is why I'm here today. I'm crazy for this one. This is my son. And a lot of people say, Brandy, so you worked in pharma. They don't really like it when ex-employees speak out. Why do you do this? You know what? They don't. They don't play nice. But I do this for him. Because he is my world, and I want a better world for him. A world with better health. A world where we have the right to decide what goes into our bodies. Because what more fundamental right do we have than to our health? I did not start speaking out until SB 277 last year. Probably a lot of you know about that. It's the law in California now that says my son, who is 5 years of age and completely vaccine-free and perfectly healthy, cannot go to school, public or private, in this state. But this is only the beginning. I cried for 2 weeks when I heard about SB 277 because I had this feeling, this innate feeling that something was coming, that I had a big mission in this life. My mom used to say the only reason she was born was to give birth to me because I was going to change the world. She died when she was 40. I was her only child. I knew something was coming. And when I heard about SB 277, I cried for 2 weeks because I thought, oh my God, I am meant to speak out against a company that is larger than most small countries. That is, holy smokes, that's not exactly what I planned in this lifetime. This is only the beginning, SB 277. USA Today wants all parents that don't vaccinate to be in jail. Time magazine wants all of their addresses released publicly, like a sexual predators database. And you know what I learned in pharma? They always drop hints. If you think this isn't going to come, well, I think you might have some regrets in 10 years if you don't become part of that army stopping it. Those who have the privilege to know have a duty to act. So people always ask me, why? Why would you take on pharma? Are you crazy? Well, yeah, I'm crazy. I'm crazy enough to think I can, grow an army to do it. And I know that I was put here to do this, and I have the knowledge, and somebody's got to act. And we cannot rely on everybody else to do it for us. We have to take back our health, and we have to stand up to the system. Each and every one of us in this room. How did I get here? I worked for Merck. I sold Vioxx. Does anyone remember Vioxx? Oh, yeah, it killed people. It killed people, and Merck knew it. So another reason I'm here today is because I sold a drug that killed people, and that haunts me. So when I came back with my vaccine-free son from Europe, and I saw this whole push for vaccines, and when SB 277 came on the docket, I said, holy smokes, this is where they're going next. I cannot not speak out about this. My experience selling Vioxx, which I won sales awards for. 4 times increase in heart attack and risk and death. Merck knew this. They stopped a study that we were already talking about with doctors. And then all of a sudden, your materials are confiscated and you can't talk about it anymore. And if you ask questions, well, you don't get answers. It was the largest drug recall ever. $6 billion was paid out in fines. But you know what? It was still a blockbuster drug. They still made $10 billion off of it. All of those lawsuits, all of the people that died, just the cost of doing business. Profit over people. That's what they care about. We cannot rely on that system. The FDA officially said 50,000 died. Others say 500,000 people died of Vioxx in the 5 years it was on the market, and it never should have been on the market. I left before it was even pulled from market. The shadiness that was going down was too much for me. How do they do it? Well, I'm going to go through these slides quickly because Brian's threatened to drag me off the stage if I don't make it in my 25 minutes. The indoctrination starts early. You guys know this. 200 Harvard med students said, get pharma out of our education, get them out of our professors' offices, get them out of our curriculum. Pharma has ghostwriters. I have a friend in New York City who does it, who writes curriculum for medical schools. They write the textbooks. And you know what Harvard did? Absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing. We have to save ourselves. What about research? Everybody says, oh, Brandy, but there are studies backing up vaccines. Who funds them? Who funds them? Pharma funds 75% of pharmaceutical drug studies. They fund pretty much all of the vaccine studies, either through the NIH or through a foundation, through the CDC. They're biased. But don't believe me. Believe Dr. Richard Horton. He's the current editor-in-chief of The Lancet, one of the most prestigious medical journals. He even says, today, perhaps half of scientific literature is simply untrue. Why? Because of conflicts of interest. Small study samples, biased. Did you know that pharma can stop a study that gets negative results and not even tell the FDA? They did it with Vioxx because it's legal. What about the FDA? They're here to protect us, right? They're the regulatory agency. They protect us from dangerous chemicals in the food, in water, and drugs, right? Do you know who was just nominated, or actually put to head the FDA? Dr. Califf? Has anyone heard about this? This right here is a scandal. Even the New York Times said his drug ties are scaring people. He is the ultimate pharmaceutical industry insider. He had a conflict of interest section declaring financial support from 20 biotech and pharmaceutical companies, and he's heading the regulatory agency. His famous quote, regulation disrupts innovation. Does that scare anyone? Because that scares me. That scares me big time. We have to push back. The CDC, Center for Disease Control, is just as bad. Julie Gerberding, she ran the CDC for 7 to 8 years. She doubled the vaccine schedule. The childhood vaccine schedule was doubled in her tenure. Guess what? She got a really good reward. She went to head Merck's global vaccine division worth $5 billion. 2 months into it, she cashed in $3 million in stock options. Pharmaceutical industry, you guys know this. They create customers, cradle-to-grave customers. But us adults, you know, we're already on a ton of meds. Where's the real money? It's in the kids, and it's in vaccines. Because they have created so many diseases and disorders, they're running out. They're running out of ways to make us more sick. But they can create vaccines for all of those diseases they've already created.
Yeah, that's pretty, I don't even know what to say. I mean, there's so
that's powerful is what that is.
And so many nuggets of truth in what she said and how it's echoing to us today that we could like draw the parallels to.
And this is her speaking in 2017, right?
Yeah, 2017. Yeah. We'll leave a link to her whole presentation was almost an hour, so we'll leave a link to that in case anybody wants to watch the whole thing. It was brilliantly done. So yeah, but there's so much, and Big Pharma doesn't play nice. Because,
not at all.
Because when we find out what happens next to her, we begin to like, you know, possibly put pieces to the puzzle together. But
go ahead and pull the slide on screen real quick, Miss Heather. She was subsequently found dead in her home December 2020 at 45 years old, leaving behind her 8-year-old son, Bastian. The thing about this is she posted many, many times publicly, if she were found dead, it was foul play. So like Chris said, these companies do not play nice at all, especially when you're giving away their game plan and you're telling the people what's really going on and you're getting attention. And Cynthia?
I was just noticing, I mean, I don't know what to say either. This, to me, it's like when a hero like Brandy passes on, she doesn't really die. It reminds me of Star Wars, where a Jedi becomes greater after they go. And to me, she's become greater. I didn't get to know her when she was alive, but I am struck by the urgency of her message, the beauty and the power of the words that she's speaking. And it's resonating, of course, on a deep level, that we need to take a closer look at what we're doing and not be bullied or pushed or rushed into making decisions that can possibly kill or maim our loved ones and family members, just so that some corporation somewhere can make a bigger profit. And because that happens to be above the law. Bastian, that's a name from the Never Ending Story, which I know Shane has done videos on about the Mandela Effect. And to me, this is a never ending story. And it does come down to imagination. What can we imagine our future to be? And I think Brandy's inviting us to reimagine something much better. I love to ask, how good can it get? Yeah, go ahead.
And she did bring up some other questions that, in my mind anyway, when she mentioned how so many things were already taken care of, that, you know, they're sort of running out of things. And then I hear about these new medications for, you know, heart inflammation for children, yet, you know, that wasn't an issue before, but you hear it's like a side effect of the vaccines. And then you wonder how much of this is just a weird coincidence or how much of it was actually planned. And, you know, it's just, you got to ask yourself the question, how do you already have medications for these things that weren't an issue last year? You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And I mentioned that I went through long COVID and COVID. I'll make it really short because I could otherwise be here for hours. But one thing part of my healing journey was trusting the natural healing power of our own bodies and our immune system, making sure that I feed myself the nutrients and the support that it requires to be able to heal and overcome things against great odds, instead of I use zero pharmaceuticals to do this healing. So I just want to emphasize that nature is here for a reason. If you believe in God, then you know God gives us what we need. Some people would say, yeah, sometimes you need a shot or a drug. Yeah, maybe. But I knew this COVID looks like it's going to be around for a long time. So I need to strengthen my body. So next time I get COVID, it'll go a lot better. And that's, I think, looking at the long strategy is something that we need to do to, like Brandy would say, take back your health, you know, just really pay attention. Sorry, this hits home for me, really, really hits home.
Absolutely.
Well, it is really taking the battle of medical tyranny to a whole new level, because we've had these people coming out telling us this is what they're about to do, telling us this is the game they're playing. Now we're seeing this really play out in reality. And I only hope that people will watch this and take away at least a little something forward with this, knowing now what the game has been for so long.
And Brandy has an organization that's still running. Is that correct? I think that is correct, right? I hope.
Yeah, it is kind of still running. If you go to learntherisk.org, they are, you know, she was really the power behind it. And when I see her, what I interpret, she was like literally like an angel in a human body. This is the way that I see Brandy Vaughn. And if you go to learntherisk.org, the website needs some help. They're trying to like raise money to redo the website and, you know, bring her message, you know, more accordingly out as it should. But one of the things, in case people were wondering, like, exactly how did she die, right? So they found her. I just wanted to mention this so that people have like a little bit of like
backstory.
Yeah, backstory. So on December 7th, 2020, they found her body in her home. They did an initial autopsy and they said she had a gallbladder attack. But no one knew that she had any gallbladder problems, including her personal physician. He didn't know what was going on. He was like, no, she didn't have any gallbladder problems. So after 3 months, the official autopsy was completed. And what they found was that they classified her manner of death as natural, caused by bilateral pulmonary thrombosis. And for pulmonary thrombosis, the definition of that is a pulmonary embolism, basically a blockage in an artery in the lungs. So, and for some of you that have watched some of the other videos I've made, I talk about some other people like Bruce Lee, who died suspiciously, General Patton, who died suddenly, and it was all with these pulmonary embolism type events. So I find that interesting as well. So the jury is definitely still out as to exactly what caused her death. But in case anyone was wondering, I wanted to just put that backstory out there too.
So thrombosis is the clotting of the blood, and that's also interesting. Some of the side effects we've seen with the current shot that they're giving out is thrombosis. That words come up for me, looking into some of the research with it.
And as a
Go ahead.
Okay, well, I'm just reading the last part on the slide here, pointing out that she did say publicly many times that if anything happened to her and she was found dead, that it was definitely foul play. Obviously, she knew something about the way perhaps some big corporations might operate to people who are vocal whistleblowers.
It's not something I have ever seen before, but there is a duck. On my table. And when I talked to the security experts, I said, I don't understand the duck. And then it came to me that I had been on my phone having a lot of conversations about people asking me, are you staying at your house? What are you going to do? And I used the term repeatedly, well, I'm not staying at my house. I feel like a sitting duck because they can get in at any time. And, I'm a sitting duck. And so that was actually quite disturbing to come home to. Now I have a duck. I have never seen it before. It's not mine. Nobody else is having access that would bring a duck. It's a clear message that, again, they are watching me. And the intimidation is quite, intimidating. And it's quite scary. So after all of these intimidation tactics, it's very hard to feel safe and secure, but I am not gonna go away. I'm not gonna be silenced because these are important issues and we need to expose what's really going on behind the mandatory vaccination bills. It has nothing to do with public health. It has everything to do with profit. And I hope that we can all continue this fight. We may have lost the battle, but we still have a war to win. And hopefully by documenting this intimidation, they won't be able to get away with it in the future with me and with anyone else who speaks out. There is some evil going on here. We need to fight it.
Exactly. And she began to hold all these rallies. As soon as she heard that there was going to be a whole vaccine program, she started holding rallies, started getting public attention, and then suddenly she was found dead. So
yeah, it really makes you wonder what the pharmaceutical industry had to do with that particular. It's just a question, but we went over a lot today, folks. We really have. We discussed the 57 Asia pandemic that we don't remember, the 68 Hong Kong flu pandemic that we don't remember. A lot of us don't remember Fauci going back to a certain date. There's the swine flu of 76, another pandemic that, again, a lot of us agreed we don't remember being a pandemic at the time. And moving into current times with the COVID situation and, of course, Miss Brandy Vaughn. And you guys, have anything you would like to add?
Well, I think some of the highlights for me were the incident in space, that was kind of gross, but that's it was proving Newtonian physics, because things were happening. I can't it's hard to say this without laughing, but it was pretty awful.
Somebody would have Saturday Night Live. Somebody would have done some kind of funny skit on it, in the movie history or something. Right? Somebody, someplace.
Something memorable, because I can think of a number of memorable things.
It would be one of those things that just kept coming back up again, because how often do you get an opportunity for astronauts to be sickened by the president and his wife, and then go up in space and then get sick in space? Wow.
The gift that
I do not remember that.
Right.
Yeah, I would say, and it would still be giving, because we would still be like now we're getting all this content out of this seemingly old event that's new to a lot of us. So yeah.
Right. And what about you guys at home? Is this new to you guys? Have you guys heard of all these different pandemics that we've had over the years? Are you aware of pandemics that could have been stitched into the timeline? Were you aware of different players at different times that a lot of us don't remember until recently? What do you guys think? Is there anything that we missed? If so, please let us know in the description section down below. I'm sorry, in the chat box down below. With that, ladies and gentlemen, I do believe that's all we have. Correct, folks?
I mean, I would want to add one thing too, and that is the question of why. So if these are Mandela effects, if they're timeline insertion, whatever they are, why are they happening? Why are they happening now? Why are we observing them now? So that leads you to another train of thought as well. So yeah,
these are good questions. We do encourage people to please ask questions. I know sometimes we might feel discouraged from that by our media, by the government, by various people in our families or places of business and so forth. Not us. We definitely encourage you to keep asking questions.
Including my favorite question. How good can it get, Miss Cynthia?
Yeah, let's go there.
if you guys are dealing with this, in all seriousness, if you're dealing with side effects, if you're dealing with situations at work, if you're dealing, especially those that are being put into really bad situations right now with their job, things like that, how good can it get? Don't look at this as a negative. This can be nothing but a positive. How good can it get is the one question that no matter how bad things get, as Cynthia would advise us, is the one question that we always need to ask the universe. Not how bad can it get, but how good can it get? If no one else has anything to add, Chris, Shane, Cynthia?
I think we're good. We'd invite you to keep joining us. If you're not subscribed to IMEC.world, please sign up. Go there and get our all the announcements about future events and what we're doing.
Once again, that is IMEC.world, IMEC, just as it sounds, .world. Ladies and gentlemen, if you would like to email us, our email down at the bottom of the screen here, team@imec.world. We do get emails quite often, and we do definitely look through those emails quite often. We try to get back as quickly as we can to you. It may take a day or two sometimes, as we're all quite busy folks, but we definitely try to reply in good manner, in good time, as best we can. Let us know what you guys thought about this very special episode. It's rare that we do special episodes like this, but being the content and nature of the episode, I'm sure you guys understand why. On behalf of Cynthia Sue Larson, Christopher Anatra, Unbiased and on the fence, Mr. Shane Robinson. My name is Jerry Hicks, also known as the Dark Wolf. Together, we are the team of the International Mandela Effect Conference. And remember, until we see you next, together we go, together we grow. Bye, everybody.
Yeah.